You tell yourself your real life has not started yet. You say, when I achieve that dream, when I move to a better city, when I finally have enough money, then I will start living the way I am supposed to live. You treat your current days like a waiting room, strictly temporary. But what if the waiting room is the entire house? What if you are spending your actual, irreplaceable days waiting for a tomorrow that does not exist? What if this waiting state you are protecting is not a plan, but an excuse? Today, we are looking at a story about people who waited their entire lives for a train that never came. By the end of this video, you will stop waiting. You will finally unpack your bags and live today, my friend. Why do we treat our current lives as a temporary waiting room for a better future? Anton Chekhov wrote Three Sisters in 1900, and he did something in this play that no self-help book has ever quite managed to replicate, even with all the bullet points and actionable strategies. He showed you, in real time, across 4 acts, exactly what it looks like when a life gets used up while the person living it is busy looking out the window at something else. No dramatic disaster. No villain. No catastrophic moment where everything goes wrong. Time passes. That is it. Time passes and the waiting room turns out to have been the whole house. 3 sisters, Olga, Masha, and Irina. They live in a dull provincial town, far from the city where they grew up, far from everything that felt alive and meaningful in their memories. Their father was a military officer. He died a year ago. Their brother Andrei lives with them. And the 3 women spend their days in a state of patient, dignified anticipation of the life that is waiting for them elsewhere. That elsewhere has a name: Moscow. How does the fantasy of a perfect tomorrow paralyze us from taking action today? Moscow is not simply a city in this play. It is a psychological event horizon. Everything difficult about their current lives, the boredom, the meaninglessness, the feeling of being somehow misplaced in the world, all of it will resolve the moment they get to Moscow. Moscow is where they were happy as children. Moscow is where their real selves live, waiting patiently for the rest of them to arrive. Moscow is the answer to everything, to all of it. And because Moscow is the answer, the present doesn't require much attention. Why deeply invest in this provincial town, these provincial relationships, this provincial life, when you are leaving soon anyway? Why fight for anything here when the real fighting will happen there, in the city where you belong? The fantasy doesn't simply give them hope, it gives them permission to not fully show up to the life they are currently living. Think about it. When was the last time you used a future version of your circumstances as a reason to not fully commit to something right now? The gym you will join when you have more time. The relationship you will invest in properly when you are less stressed. The creative project you will start when you have the right setup. The friendships you will maintain when life settles down. The living you will do when the conditions are better. The sisters have been waiting for Moscow for years. Why do we believe that changing our physical location will miraculously fix our internal emptiness? Because the fantasy is more comfortable than the diagnosis. The fantasy says the problem is external. You are unhappy here because here is wrong. The solution is geographical. Get to the right place and the unhappiness will lift. The diagnosis would say something harder. It would say the restlessness you feel is not a problem with your location. It is something you carry with you. And Moscow, if you ever got there, would be a city with the same hours in its days and the same requirement that you show up to your life and make choices and do the hard, unglamorous work of building something real. But diagnosis requires honesty. And honesty requires looking directly at the thing you have been avoiding by staring at the horizon. Then the military regiment arrives in town. A whole group of officers, cultured men, people from the wider world, bringing with them the energy of lives lived at a different scale. And the sisters respond to this arrival the way people respond to any distraction that offers temporary relief from the underlying discomfort. They embrace it completely. The house fills with conversation and noise and the illusion of movement. There are people to talk to, things to discuss, the feeling of being at the center of something rather than on the edge of nothing. And here is the crazy part. What happens when the temporary compromises we make while waiting become our permanent reality? The regiment is a distraction. The sisters understand this in some part of themselves. They are not naive women. But because Moscow is coming, because the real life is right around the corner, a little distraction in the waiting room doesn't seem dangerous. Why not enjoy the company while you are waiting? Why not let the noise fill the empty rooms for a while? Meanwhile, their brother Andrei falls in love with Natasha. Natasha is not the kind of woman the sisters would have chosen for him. She is petty, she is self-interested, she is socially anxious in a way that manifests as aggression. The sisters see exactly who she is. They are not fooled. But they don't fight it with any real energy, because they are leaving for Moscow soon. Why have a major confrontation over something that won't affect them for long? Why dig in and hold the line when you are about to leave the territory? So Andrei marries Natasha, and Natasha moves in. Why is complaining about our current situation easier than taking the risk to actually change it? Because complaining is free. It costs nothing. You can complain about Natasha taking over the house, about the unfairness of the situation, about the way things have deteriorated, while simultaneously doing absolutely nothing to alter any of it. Complaining gives you the feeling of having acknowledged the problem without requiring you to do the harder thing, which is intervene, resist, make the difficult choice that might not work out. The sisters are very good at noticing what is wrong. They are articulate, intelligent, perceptive women. They see every inch of their situation with clarity. But seeing clearly and acting decisively are two completely different skills, and in the waiting room, acting decisively barely seems necessary. You don't need to fix the waiting room. You are leaving soon. How do the toxic people around us slowly invade our lives while we are distracted by our dreams? Slowly. That is the terrifying answer. Not in a dramatic, sudden coup. One request at a time. One small territory at a time. Natasha asks if her child can have one of the sisters' rooms. Reasonable. Temporary. Fine. Then another room. Then she starts suggesting how the household should run. Then she is running it. Then the house, which belonged to the family, which was the sister's home, is operating entirely according to Natasha's preferences. And each individual step seemed too small to fight about, especially when you are leaving anyway. By the time the sisters notice the full extent of what has happened, they are strangers in their own house. Years have passed. Here is the part of this play that Chekhov writes with a cruelty that is all the more devastating for being utterly devoid of melodrama. The years pass the way years actually pass. Not in a montage, not announced by any dramatic event. The sisters are simply older. Irina's face shows it. Olga has been teaching for years, and the teaching has worn her down in ways she didn't anticipate when she thought of it as temporary. Masha is trapped in a marriage to a man she doesn't love, trapped because she made a temporary compromise years ago, and the temporary became permanent while she was looking elsewhere. Why do we stay in dead-end situations even when the door is wide open? Because leaving requires admitting that you stayed too long. It requires looking at the years and acknowledging what was lost in them. And the loss is immense. The energy, the youth, the possibilities that were available and weren't taken, the roads not walked because the road to Moscow was always the one that mattered. Confronting all of that directly requires a kind of courage that is very hard to find when you are exhausted from years of waiting. And Moscow. What about Moscow? They still talk about it. The phrase turns up in the play with the persistence of a habit that has long outlived any connection to actual planning. Moscow. They say it the way you say something that has stopped meaning what it used to mean and now means something else entirely. Not a destination, a feeling. The feeling of a life that was supposed to happen. What is the real cost of waiting for someone else to come and rescue you? Irina is the youngest sister, and she started this story with the most energy, the most openness, the most genuine hope. She wanted to work, to be useful, to build something real. She took a job and then another job and found each one grinding and meaningless. And now, after years of meaningless work and the steady erosion of the Moscow dream and the invasion of Natasha and the departure of everything that made the provincial life bearable, she makes a decision. She agrees to marry Baron Tuzenbach. She doesn't love him. She is honest about this, to herself and to him, but he is kind and he is real and he represents a possible exit from the waiting room. Not Moscow, not the dream, a smaller thing. A compromise with reality. A decision to stop waiting for the perfect rescue and accept a serviceable one. But the cost of years of waiting is already embedded in this choice. She is not the young woman who arrived at the beginning full of possibility. She is a woman who has been worn down, whose best options have narrowed, who is choosing from a smaller menu than the one that was available years ago when she was still deciding whether to fully commit to this life or to hold herself in reserve for Moscow. How does time betray us when we are refusing to pay attention? Quietly, without announcement. You look up one day and the face in the mirror has changed in ways you didn't track happening. The friend you were going to call is now someone you don't quite know how to reach anymore. The opportunity that seemed like it would always be available has closed. The years that were supposed to be the waiting years turn out to have been years, actual years, with actual days in them that are now gone. Chekhov is not telling you this to be cruel. He is telling you because he watched it happen, and he wanted you to see it clearly before it happened to you. The regiment gets its orders. The military men are leaving town. The men who brought excitement and energy and the feeling of the wider world into the provincial waiting room are packing up. And as they leave, something else becomes clear. The possibility of change that their presence represented was always borrowed. It was never anchored in anything the sisters built for themselves. Tuzenbach is killed in a duel before the wedding. Gone. Another exit door closed, this one more permanently than the others. And the sisters stand there, the three of them, watching the regiment march away. The music gets quieter, the soldiers get smaller, and then they are gone, and the street is empty, and the town is exactly what it always was, and the sisters are still in it. If the perfect tomorrow never arrives, what exactly are you doing with your today? They will never go to Moscow. The play doesn't end with a revelation that allows them to believe they will. It ends with the quiet, devastating truth. This is the life, not the waiting room for the life itself, and most of it is behind them. Let's be honest with each other for a second. You have a Moscow, everyone does. The thing you are waiting for that will make the current situation make sense retroactively, the destination that justifies the delay, the achievement, the relationship, the city, the circumstance, the version of your life that you are waiting to inhabit so that you can finally stop holding yourself in reserve and actually show up. But here is what Chekhov understood about the psychology of waiting that most of us spend decades refusing to learn. The waiting is not a neutral activity. The waiting room is not a pause in the story. While you are standing at the window looking at the horizon, Natasha is walking through your front door. The temporary compromises are calcifying into permanent reality. The people who could have been your actual life, the relationships that could have developed into something real, the work that could have built into something meaningful, are being experienced at half attention because your main focus is somewhere else. The play is not a tragedy in the dramatic sense. Nobody is struck down by fate. Nobody makes one catastrophic error. Three intelligent, perceptive, genuinely decent women simply wait. And the waiting has a cost that accumulates so gradually they can't see it accumulating. And then it's accumulated. You are probably in the middle of your own version of this right now. The version where the real life is almost ready, where the conditions are almost right, where the next milestone will unlock the actual living. And your actual days are piling up behind you while you look at the horizon. There is no Moscow. That is the hardest line in the play, and it is not spoken. It is demonstrated, slowly, across 4 acts, by 3 sisters who kept saying the word and never took the first step toward the station. There is the town you are in, there are the people in front of you, there is today, which is a real day with real hours in it that will not come back. The meaningful work you want to be doing, you can start a version of it today. Not the ideal version, a real version. The relationship you want to invest in properly, you can invest in it today. Not perfectly, really. Stop treating your life as a rehearsal for your life. The band is playing now, right now. And in some version of the story you are refusing to see, it is already beginning to march away. Unpack your bags. You are already in Moscow. You were always in Moscow, and Moscow is where you are.